They say time heals everything. But time didn't see what I saw that day. It didn't see a man, a judge, turn pale the moment his eyes met mine. It didn't hear the silence that fell when he whispered a name no one else in that courtroom knew. My name. For 30 years, I lived as a ghost. A woman erased from her own story, waiting for the truth to crawl back from the grave. And when it finally did, it didn't come gently. It came wearing a judge's robe. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about what happens when the people who hide behind power are finally forced to remember. It's about a secret buried beneath paper, lies, and a single word that changes everything. If you're here now, stay. Because before this ends, you'll understand why the judge went pale, and why no one in that room ever spoke my name again. Subscribe before you forget, because some truths should never be heard alone. The judge saw me and went pale. No one knew who I was. I arrived before the courthouse doors opened, standing quietly beneath the flickering light. The marble floor was cold, and the air smelled faintly of dust and rain. People gathered in small groups, whispering as if sharing secrets they didn't own. No one looked at me long enough to recognize anything. That was exactly what I wanted. Inside my handbag rested a thick envelope sealed in blue wax. I had written the letter inside by hand last night, steady and deliberate. Every line had been rewritten until the ink stopped bleeding through the paper. Beneath it lay an old photograph, creased edges, faded corners, a baby in a man's arms. I traced the outline of a smile with my thumb until it felt alive again. I told myself to breathe slowly, to let the silence carry my weight. I wasn't there for justice. I had already buried that word years ago. What I needed was something smaller and heavier, clarity, maybe peace. The benches creaked when people sat down, their echoes sharp against the marble. A clerk pushed a metal cart past me, and its wheels squeaked like an old swing. I checked my phone for messages, though I knew there would be none. Only a screenshot waited for me, a bank transfer marked "canceled" in gray print. The field for reason was empty, but I already knew who had filled that blank. He wore a robe now and smiled like nothing could ever reach him again. When the inner door opened, he stepped out surrounded by 2 aides. His hair was still neat, every step careful, rehearsed powerful. He didn't notice me at first. That moment was mine to own. I fixed the collar of my coat and met his eyes across the hall. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale as old paper. He stopped walking. His aides kept speaking until they saw he'd turned to stone. He opened his mouth twice before words found their shape. "Name it," he said, and I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. I pulled the envelope from my bag and held it toward him. "Trade," I said, my voice even but shaking inside. His jaw tightened. "Price." "Truth," I answered. He stared at the seal as if it might burn his fingers. The hallway felt thinner, air drawn out by something invisible. He reached forward, stopped halfway, caught between guilt and caution. I lowered the envelope before he could touch it. "Not yet," I whispered. His lips trembled. "What do you want from me?" I smiled softly, the way a widow smiles at an old ghost. 3 minutes, I said. He hesitated, then gestured toward an empty side room down the hall. His aides moved to follow, but he lifted his hand to stop them. We walked inside together, and when I closed the door, the sound echoed like an ending. He turned to me, eyes wide, voice breaking, and the name he spoke was one I hadn't heard in 20 years. "Mother!" He closed the door softly, as if afraid the walls could still listen. The air inside was warmer, heavy with the scent of polished wood and regret. I placed my bag on the table, the leather creasing like tired skin. The light above us flickered again, humming in the rhythm of my heartbeat. He stayed standing, measuring the space between us with his silence. I sat first. My chair groaned. His eyes followed every small movement I made. 3 minutes, I reminded him, letting each word fall slow and measured. He nodded, though his hands betrayed him, trembling near the edge of his robe. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding each sheet like a confession. The first page was the canceled bank transfer, stamped and dated. The word "canceled" sat there like a quiet accusation no court could erase. He reached for it, but stopped halfway, afraid of touching what he already knew. I placed the next paper beside it, a crumpled kitchen note, old and stained. 2 short lines, written in his handwriting, still clear despite the years. I watched him recognize it instantly, his breath cutting short, chest sinking. That note had been left on my table the night he disappeared. I told him I burned it once, but never forgot what it said. I'm sorry. It was never meant to be this way. He closed his eyes, repeating the line under his breath like a prayer. Then I pulled out a third paper, printed yesterday, a call log from an unknown number. It lasted 42 seconds. The name attached to it was his old one. I pinned it to the table with my finger so he would see it clearly. I received this call 2 weeks ago, I said quietly. The voice said your name, then hung up. No one called again. His face tightened, and he reached for the chair opposite me. He finally sat, as if gravity had been waiting for permission. We stared at the papers, ghosts between us, breathing through ink and memory. Bargain, he said, the word breaking through his teeth. Bargain, I repeated. You know what I came for. He glanced toward the door, then back at me. They can't know. I don't care who knows, I said. I care who remembers. I slid the photo across the table, the baby in his arms, my younger face behind. His fingers brushed the plastic, trembling like a leaf caught in cold wind. Who told you? He asked again, voice barely human now. The truth doesn't need a messenger, I replied. He unfastened his watch, turned the crown, and stopped the ticking sound. Outside the door, someone knocked once, impatient, then twice, softer. He didn't answer. Neither did I. He leaned closer, voice shaking with something between fear and hope. There's something you don't know, he said. He's alive. My throat closed around the words that tried to rise. The light flickered again, and for a heartbeat, I wasn't sure who looked more haunted, him or me. The room fell into silence after those 2 words. He's alive. The echo hung in the air, sharp and unreal, as if the walls were breathing with us. My hands went cold, and I could feel the pulse beating inside my palms. 4 years, I had buried the thought under layers of routine, pretending not to hope. He leaned back in his chair, the robe folding around him like a curtain. His voice was low, fragile, stripped of the authority that used to fill courtrooms. They told me he didn't make it, that it was over. I believed them. He rubbed his temples, his fingers trembling with the weight of years. They lied to both of us, I said. But why? He looked at me then, really looked. Not as a judge, not as a man once proud of his distance. His eyes softened, though his mouth could not shape an apology. There was an order, he whispered. A name I wasn't supposed to question. He paused, then reached for the envelope again, desperate for something solid to hold. Someone paid for silence, he said, voice breaking in half. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent light above us. It felt like the only thing alive between 2 people long dead in spirit. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Who? How? When? But my throat closed. He stared at the note I'd brought, the one he wrote years ago, and laughed bitterly. That was the only truth I could give you back then, he said. I left because I thought it would save you. Save him. The word, save, sounded obscene. Save from what? From love. From life itself. I wanted to hate him, but my anger was too tired to stand. He reached into his pocket and placed something small on the table. A ring box, old and scuffed, the velvet faded to brown. I hadn't seen it since the night by the river, the night everything ended. He opened it slowly, revealing not a ring, but a folded slip of paper. I recognized the handwriting instantly, not his, not mine. This was left in his cradle, he said, the day they took him away. He pushed the note toward me, his hand shaking. I unfolded it with care, afraid the paper might turn to dust. 4 words. That's all it said. He knows the truth now. I looked up at him, searching for something human behind that pale mask. He couldn't meet my eyes anymore. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely audible. He swallowed hard. It means he's coming. The hum of the light above us deepened into silence. Somewhere outside, footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate, certain. The sound grew closer, 1 step at a time, echoing against the marble floor. Neither of us spoke. Each footfall was like a countdown, dragging memories we both tried to forget. He straightened his robe, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. I folded the small note again and held it tightly, afraid to let it go. The door handle moved once, then stopped. He looked at me, panic spreading across his face. They can't see you here, he whispered. But they already know, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He shook his head like a man refusing a sentence he had written himself. Another knock, firmer this time. He turned away and reached for the handle. Before he could touch it, I spoke. Let him in. The words slipped from me before I had time to regret them. The door opened slowly, revealing a young man in a dark coat. His eyes scanned the room before landing on me. Something inside me recognized him instantly, not the face but the gaze. It was the same quiet fire his father once carried before it turned to ash. He stepped forward, cautious but unafraid, as if he had rehearsed this moment. The judge froze, his lips parting but no words coming out. I could feel the air shift, heavy with all the years we had lost. The young man looked from him to me, confusion and anger twisting together. So, he said softly, this is the truth you both buried. His tone wasn't loud, but it hit harder than any accusation. I tried to speak, but my throat locked around his name. He didn't wait for an answer. He placed a folded document on the table, its edges still warm from a printer. I found this, he said. It's your signature, Judge. And hers too. I stared at the paper, the ink already smudging beneath his thumb. It was a guardianship form, mine, dated the same week he vanished. The man I loved had signed my son away without ever telling me. My name appeared only as a witness, never as a mother. The words blurred before my eyes, my pulse crashing in my ears. He looked at me, his voice trembling. You both chose for me. Why? The judge tried to stand, but I raised a hand to stop him. I didn't choose, I said. I was told you were gone. The boy's jaw tightened. Then who made that lie worth keeping? No one answered. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant, slow and final. Inside, 3 people stood around one truth, each too late to undo it. The young man took a deep breath, his expression unreadable. Then he whispered something that cut through the air like glass. You'll both see him before the end. And then he turned toward the hallway, leaving the door open behind him. The door stayed open, letting the echo of his footsteps drift away. Neither of us moved for a long time. The papers on the table trembled slightly from the draft, as if breathing. He sat again, slower this time, the robe sliding off his shoulders like a weight. I watched him stare at the empty doorway, eyes unfocused, lips pressed tight. He looks just like him, I said, breaking the silence that wrapped around us. He nodded once, but his voice refused to follow. I wanted to cry, but the tears had forgotten their way back. There was only that strange stillness, like the moment between lightning and thunder. I reached for the guardianship form, holding it up against the light. My name was there, small, printed like an afterthought. Beneath it, his signature stretched clean and confident, untouched by guilt. You signed away a life, I whispered. And you called it mercy. His eyes flickered, and for the first time I saw shame. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. They threatened everything, he said softly. The court, the reputation, the family. If anyone knew I had a child with you, I would have lost everything. You already did, I said. You just didn't realize it yet. He looked at me then, and there was no defense left in him. Only the hollow exhaustion of a man who built his world out of lies. He found the note, he muttered. He found the files I tried to destroy. My pulse quickened. What files? He hesitated, then opened his briefcase with a quiet click. Inside was a small brown folder, edges burnt, the label half torn away. He pushed it toward me, eyes refusing to meet mine. I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken through glass, dated 28 years ago. One showed me holding the baby near the river. Another, a hospital record with false names but familiar dates. Every secret we buried was catalogued, archived, kept alive by paper. There's more, he said. The one who arranged it all is still here. My chest tightened. Who? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully, as if naming them would make them appear. The woman who raised him, he said. She worked for me then. His voice broke into a whisper. And she never forgave what we did. For a moment, the world tilted. I remember the phone call. The voice that trembled but knew too much. It hadn't been a stranger. It had been her. She's the one who told him everything, I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, eyes distant, haunted. She said you would come. That you'd want the truth before she did. I leaned back, the papers slipping from my hand to the floor. Before she did what? He looked up, his face drained of color. She said she was dying. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with all the things unsaid. She's dying, I repeated, the words leaving my lips like ash. He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy and far away. She called me last month, said she had something left to give back. I didn't believe her. He ran a hand over his face, the lines on his skin deeper than I remembered. She said she was keeping something safe all these years. Something for him, not for me. I swallowed hard, already knowing what it was before he said it. The birth certificate, I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. The real one. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. For decades, I had carried only shadows of truth, half names, half memories, half hope. Now everything pointed back to one woman who had never stopped watching. She worked in your house, I said. She was his nurse. He looked down. She was more than that. She was the one who made sure he survived. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling. All those years I believed he was gone, she had known otherwise. I could almost see her face now, lined but kind, holding secrets in tired eyes. She loved him like her own, I said softly. He nodded again, guilt pressing on every word. And she hated me for it. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the hum of the light above us. She called me too, I said after a moment. His head jerked up. The day before yesterday. The number was blocked, but the voice. I stopped, shivering. She said one sentence and hung up. What did she say? He asked. I looked at him, steady, not blinking. She said, he's on his way to finish what you started. He went pale, the kind of pale that erases blood from the face. That can't be true, he whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. It is, I said quietly. And you know what he's coming for. He looked at the envelope again. The papers scattered, the ashes of our past spread across the table. We need to find her, I said. Before he does. His lips parted, uncertain. You still think we can fix this? I shook my head. Not fix it. Just face it. He stood, buttoning his robe like armor, though it did nothing to hide the fear in his eyes. I'll drive, he said, reaching for his keys. I gathered the folder, the note, the photograph, slipping them all back into the envelope. As we stepped into the hallway, I could feel every eye turn toward us. Two ghosts walking back into the world they once abandoned. The marble floor gleamed under the pale light. Outside, rain had started to fall, slow, deliberate drops tapping against the glass doors. He pushed them open, and the chill rushed in, sharp and cleansing. For the first time in decades, we were walking toward the same truth. Neither of us ready for what waited at the end of that road. We drove in silence for nearly an hour. The city fell away behind us, replaced by long stretches of wet road and dying trees. The rain came steady now, thin and gray, blurring the edges of every passing light. He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes locked ahead, the wipers moving in a tired rhythm. Every few minutes, he opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. I watched the landscape roll by, gas stations closed early, houses sinking into fog. The further we went, the more it felt like time was reversing itself. I hadn't been back to that part of town in 28 years. The last time I came here, I was holding a baby and begging for mercy. Now I was holding the truth, and it felt heavier than him ever did. She still lives in the same house. I asked quietly. He nodded. Never left. She said the place remembers everything for her. I looked out the window and saw it before he spoke again. The small white house at the end of the gravel road. Its porch light flickering like an old heartbeat refusing to quit. He parked beneath the oak tree, killed the engine, and let out a long breath. Do you want me to go in first? He asked. I shook my head. You've already been first too many times. I stepped out, the rain soaking through my shoes before I reached the door. The sound of thunder rolled low behind the hills, like a warning whispered too late. The door opened before I could knock. She was there, thinner, smaller than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp. She didn't look surprised. I told him you'd come, she said, her voice barely louder than the rain. I froze in the doorway, unsure whether to thank her or curse her. The judge stepped up behind me, his presence heavy as guilt. She looked past me toward him and shook her head. I thought you'd never have the courage to face this. He didn't answer. She turned her gaze back to me and gestured toward the living room. Come in. He's waiting. The words hit like a blade pressed flat against my skin. I wanted to ask who she meant, but I already knew. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old books and rain-soaked wood. On the mantel, a clock ticked softly, steady and indifferent. Then I saw it, a photograph resting beside a candle. A young man, older now, older than the baby I lost. The same eyes, the same half-smile, and the same crooked scar near his chin. My knees went weak, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. She placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and whispered, He's in the next room. He's been waiting for this day his whole life. The judge's voice broke the silence behind me. Does he know everything? He asked. She looked at him, calm, almost pitying. He knows enough, she said. Enough to make his own judgment. I turned toward the hallway, the door slightly open, a shadow moving beyond it. My heart beat, so loudly I couldn't hear the rain anymore. And for the first time since that night by the river, I was truly afraid. I stepped into the hallway, every breath slow and heavy. The light from the living room faded behind me, leaving only the soft hum of rain. The air smelled like damp wood and old paper, like memories left out too long. Each step echoed softly on the floorboards, creaking under the weight of what I carried. The door at the end was half open. I could see part of the room, a small desk, a lamp, stacks of folders. And him. He sat facing the window, his reflection flickering against the glass. When he turned, it felt like the world stopped just long enough for me to see the boy I once held. His hair was darker now, but his eyes, those eyes, they were mine. I froze in the doorway, unsure if I should call his name or stay silent. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. You came, he said. His voice was calm, too calm, as if this moment had already happened in his mind. I wasn't sure you would. I took a step forward, words slipping through the cracks of my throat. I didn't know how to. He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Neither did he. Behind me, I could hear the judge standing in the hall, breathing shallowly. The space between them was the same distance that had split all our lives apart. The young man stood and crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. He placed a folder on the table beside the lamp. This is everything, he said. Every paper, every name, every lie. His fingers brushed the edge of the folder, as if he wanted to tear it apart but couldn't. I thought knowing the truth would make me free, he whispered. But it just made me angry. I reached out, but he didn't move closer. I never meant for you to grow up without knowing, I said softly. His eyes met mine, sharp, searching, wounded. You both had a choice, he said. And somehow, I was the one who paid for it. The words hit harder than any scream could. He turned toward the judge. You wanted to protect your name. I was your stain. The man who once ruled courtrooms stood there, mute, smaller than I had ever seen him. The judge opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The young man laughed, quiet and bitter. Now you can't even say my name, can you? He looked back at me. But you remember it. I did. It burned in the back of my throat like something holy and forbidden. I said it out loud, trembling. Elias. His eyes softened for a moment, then darkened again. She told me what you did after he left, he said. How you kept the ashes. I nodded, feeling my knees shake. I couldn't bury him. Not without knowing. He stared at me, voice low, shaking. Then bury me now, because I'm not the boy you lost. He turned toward the door, brushing past the judge without looking at him. I reached out, desperate to stop him, but he didn't turn back. I came here to end this, he said, pausing at the threshold. Not to forgive it. The door slammed, leaving only the sound of rain. And in that silence, I realized forgiveness had never been what any of us came for. The echo of the door closing seemed to stretch forever. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room felt smaller without him, yet somehow emptier than before he entered. The judge stood by the hallway, pale and shaking, like a man who had just read his own verdict. Rain slid down the window in crooked lines, distorting the world outside. He hates us, I said finally, though it sounded more like a confession than a statement. He nodded once, but his voice was gone. I sat down at the desk, staring at the folder Elias had left behind. My fingers hovered above it, afraid that opening it would make the pain permanent. But I did it anyway. Inside were photographs, the same ones from the burned file, but more. Hospital records, a foster list, a transfer document marked confidential. A letter, and signed, printed on legal stationery. I read the first line and my breath caught. For his safety, the child will be placed under a protected identity. I handed the letter to him. He took it without a word, eyes darting across the page, lips trembling as he read. When he reached the bottom, his face went slack. "My father's name," he whispered. "He used my father's name." The realization hit like thunder breaking through a roof. "That's how they erased him," I said. "They hid him behind your bloodline." He dropped the paper onto the desk, head bowed. All those years I thought I was protecting him. I was protecting a lie. He covered his face, shoulders shaking, though no sound escaped him. I didn't know whether he was crying or just breathing too hard to stay upright. Outside, a car door slammed sharp close. We both froze. Through the window, I saw Elias crossing the yard, soaked in rain, clutching something in his hand. He wasn't leaving. He was circling back. In his grip was a small black box, the kind used for evidence, or for keeping things that shouldn't exist. He walked straight past the porch light and stopped by the oak tree. I stood, heart pounding. He's going to do something. The judge moved toward the door, but I caught his arm. "Wait!" Elias knelt in the mud, placing the box on the ground like an offering. He lifted his face toward the rain and shouted something we couldn't hear. The old nurse, the woman who had kept his secret, appeared in the doorway behind him. Her voice trembled. "It's his father's ashes," she said. "He wants to give them back." The judge's knees buckled, and he caught the wall for balance. I ran to the window, my breath fogging the glass. Elias struck a match, shielding it from the rain with his hand. The flame flickered weakly, a fragile light against the storm. He placed it beside the box, and for a moment it refused to die. Then it went out, swallowed by wind and water. He didn't look back at us, not once. When he finally walked away into the night, I knew he had burned something we never could. The last illusion that any of this could still be mended. I turned to the judge, my voice breaking into a whisper. "What happens now?" He stared at the empty yard, his eyes hollow. "Now," he said quietly, "we wait to see which one of us survives the truth." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the house wrapped in a strange stillness. The rain had washed away every trace of last night, except the ache inside my chest. The oak tree stood dark against the gray sky, its roots drinking what was left of our sins. Through the window, I could see the small patch of ground where Elias had knelt. The box was gone. Only a circle of wet ashes remained. The judge hadn't spoken since. He sat in the same chair, robe still damp, eyes fixed on nothing. The nurse had covered him with a blanket sometime during the night, but his hands kept clutching the edge of it, as if afraid to let go. I made coffee, though neither of us drank it. The smell filled the house, bitter, grounding real. I stood by the window, cup in hand, trying to believe the night had actually happened. Part of me wanted to run after Elias, to explain that I wasn't the same woman who had signed away his name. But another part knew that forgiveness can't be forced, it has to ripen on its own. The nurse entered quietly, her step soft, her face pale. "She left a note," she said, holding out a small envelope. I frowned. "Who did?" She hesitated. "Elias. He slid it under the door before he left." The paper was wet at the corners, the ink slightly blurred but still legible. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling as I read. "I didn't come here to punish you. I came to understand why I was never allowed to be myself. He told lies to survive. You stayed silent to forget. But I've lived my whole life trying to fix both of you. Keep the truth. I don't need it anymore." I read it twice before my eyes finally blurred. The words were gentle, not angry, not cruel, just final. The judge asked to see it, and I handed it over. He stared at the note for a long time, his lips moving soundlessly. Then, for the first time since I'd known him, he whispered, "He's stronger than both of us." We sat together in that quiet house until the light changed. The nurse began to pack the papers and files into a single box. I didn't stop her. Some truths are too heavy to carry twice. When she closed the lid, The sound was soft, but it felt like an ending. Outside, a car engine started. Not ours, not his. A neighbor, maybe. Life resuming. But something in me knew that our story wouldn't fade as easily. We would both return to our worlds, marked and silent. He with his robe, me with my ghosts. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, I thought about Elias, somewhere out there, walking into a new life. He had chosen to leave the truth behind. I wondered if I could do the same. For the first time in decades, I wasn't sure which of us had been saved. We buried the box that afternoon. Not in a graveyard, not under marble or stone, just beneath the oak tree where the rain had stopped. The nurse said it was what he wanted, though none of us were sure anymore what he meant. The ashes were cold, mixed with soil, with pieces of paper too fragile to unfold. It wasn't a burial for a man or a memory, but for everything we couldn't forgive. The judge stood beside me, his face empty, stripped of every title he'd ever worn. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. He just watched the dirt fall, handful after handful, until it covered what was left of our history. The nurse placed a single white flower on top, a magnolia, wilted at the edges. "Something pure," she said softly, "even if it doesn't last." We walked back toward the porch in silence. The wooden steps creaked beneath our weight, and for a moment I thought of how many times I had walked away from this house, always thinking it would be the last. But this time felt different. This time I wasn't running. Inside, the air was lighter. The morning light fell across the table, illuminating the envelope Elias had left open beside the cold coffee cups. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it toward him. "Read it again," I said. Slowly this time. He obeyed without a word. When he finished, he folded it carefully and pressed it against his chest. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I don't know how to live after this." I looked at him, tired but calm. "You don't. You start instead." The nurse was standing by the door, watching us with eyes that had seen too much. "He'll come back someday," she said. "Maybe not here, maybe not for you. But he will." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to imagine a version of the world where he'd walk back through that door, not as a stranger, but as a man who'd finally made peace with his beginning. But deep down, I knew better. Some stories don't circle back. They just fade into quieter versions of themselves. We carry the echoes, the pieces, the what-ifs, and we learn to live beside them. I looked out through the window one last time. The rain had stopped completely. The road beyond the oak was clean again, washed of mud and memory. A single ray of light cut through the clouds and landed on the grave we'd made. For the first time, I didn't look away. He turned toward me, his voice softer than it had ever been. "What will you do now?" I smiled faintly. "I'll go home," I said, "wherever that still is." He nodded, almost relieved. "And me?" "You'll return to your courtroom," I said, "but leave your robes behind." He closed his eyes. "And if he never forgives us—" I reached for the door, letting the wind touch my face. "Then at least he won't have to remember us anymore." Weeks passed before I went back to the courthouse. The autumn light had softened by then, and the city looked washed out, like a painting left too long in the sun. I didn't plan to go inside. I just wanted to see the place where everything had unraveled. The marble steps were the same, cold, uneven, echoing under each careful step. The guard at the entrance didn't recognize me, and I didn't offer a name. The hallway still smelled like paper and polish, the way old institutions do. It felt smaller now, stripped of its power. I found the courtroom door half open. Inside, a hearing was taking place, quiet, procedural, ordinary. A young judge sat behind the bench, reading from a file without looking up, his voice even and detached. I watched from the corridor unseen, remembering the man who once ruled that room like a god, and how fragile his silence had been when truth found him. I didn't stay long. On my way out, I passed the clerk's desk and saw a framed photo tucked behind a stack of papers. It was the judge, the man I once knew, standing beside the same oak tree. No robe, no title, just a man holding a flower in the dirt. The clerk noticed me staring and said quietly, "He retired last month. Didn't tell anyone why. Just left." I nodded, thanking her, though my throat was tight. Outside, the wind caught the edge of my coat, carrying the faint scent of rain, even though the sky was clear. I walked to the park across the street, sat on a bench, and opened my bag. Inside was a smaller envelope, the same one I'd carried since that day at the house. Elias's handwriting, still steady, still certain. I read the note again, feeling the words settle differently this time. Keep the truth. I don't need it anymore. Maybe that was what he had meant all along. That knowing wasn't healing. That sometimes letting go is the only justice left. I closed the envelope and placed it beneath a tree root near the bench. Not buried, just hidden, enough for the earth to remember it. When I stood, I felt lighter, as if I'd finally stepped out of a story that had kept me frozen in place. Across the street, a group of students passed by laughing, their voices clear and alive in the morning air. One of them looked back at me for a second. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, familiar in a way that made my heart pause. But he didn't stop. He just smiled faintly and kept walking. And for the first time in my life, I didn't chase the past when it walked away. That night, I sat by my window with a single lamp lit. The city outside was quiet, soaked in the orange haze of streetlights. I had tried to sleep, but silence has a way of dragging memories back to the surface. So I opened a notebook, one of the old ones I used to keep my thoughts in. And I began to write, not to him, not to the judge, but to Elias, the son who had come back only to remind me of what love costs when it's buried too long. My pen moved slowly at first, each word deliberate, as if carving something meant to last longer than I could. My dear Elias, I once thought a mother's silence could protect her child. I believed that keeping you away from pain would spare you from becoming me. But I see now that silence is its own kind of cruelty. It keeps you safe from the truth, but never from the emptiness it leaves behind. I paused, listening to the hum of the city through the thin glass. Somewhere, a siren wailed, distant and brief. It reminded me that life outside these walls had never stopped moving. Even when mine had. You asked me why we chose for you. The truth is, I didn't choose, I froze. I thought if I waited long enough, the world would fix what we had broken. But the world doesn't fix silence. It just grows over it like moss on stone. My handwriting wavered. The ink bled slightly where my hand trembled. I let the pen rest, staring at what I'd written. There was no apology strong enough, no sentence that could make time go backward. I turned the page and wrote one last paragraph. If you ever read this, I don't want forgiveness. I only hope you'll remember that you were loved, even in the wrong way. And that sometimes love, when it's frightened, hides behind the cruelest decisions. I signed only my first name. No date, no address. Then I folded the page, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote one word on the front: someday. The next morning, I left it on the bench beneath the same tree in the park. The wind lifted the edge of it as I walked away, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back to see if someone would find it. Maybe it would stay there untouched. Maybe he would return someday and see it waiting. Or maybe the rain would take it, and that would be enough. Either way, it was the only truth I still had left to give. A month passed before the phone rang again. It was early morning, the kind of gray light that makes everything look uncertain. The sound startled me. No one called this number anymore. I almost didn't answer, but something deep in my chest told me to pick it up. The line cracked once, then settled into quiet. For a moment, I thought it was a wrong number. Then a voice I knew too well spoke my name. Mother! My hand went cold. I couldn't speak. The sound of his breathing on the other end was enough to bring the whole world back. It wasn't anger this time, not even pain. Just a strange calm, like both of us were standing on opposite sides of a grave we'd already filled. I found the letter, he said. His tone was measured, steady. You left it under the same tree, the one with the bench. I closed my eyes. The wind outside was moving the curtains, softly, like someone brushing past me without wanting to be seen. You weren't supposed to find it yet, I said quietly. I wasn't supposed to find you either, he replied. His words carried no accusation, just a kind of exhausted truth. I read it twice, he continued. Once as a son, once as a man. I didn't know which reading hurt more. What did you think? I asked. There was a pause, long and heavy. I think you loved the way you knew how, he said. And maybe that's enough. My throat tightened, my vision blurring with the sting of tears I didn't expect to shed. He went on, slower now. She's gone. The nurse. I'd buried her by the oak, next to the ashes. I whispered her name, letting it hang in the air like a prayer. She told me before she died that you never stopped waiting for me. I didn't, I said. Not for a single day. Silence again, but it felt different this time. Not heavy, just full. Where are you? I asked. On the road, he said, heading somewhere quieter. I tried to imagine the landscape through his eyes. Open fields, a long road, the weight of ghosts finally lifting. He laughed softly, almost a sigh. You don't have to look for me anymore, he said. I know, I whispered, but I still will. The line clicked once, then went dead. I kept the phone pressed to my ear long after the silence returned. Outside, the first light of morning touched the buildings across the street, turning the windows gold for a few seconds before fading into white. I set the phone down and smiled through the tears, because for the first time in 28 years, he had called me mother, and meant it. After that call, the house never felt the same. The walls that once held my silence now felt too small, too alive. I started leaving the windows open, letting the wind move through the rooms. Some days, I could almost hear him in it, not speaking, just existing, like a shadow that no longer frightened me. The judge wrote once, a short letter on plain paper. He said he had moved to a coastal town, that he spent his mornings walking the beach collecting broken shells. He didn't mention his robe, or the courthouse, or the past. Just one line at the end. Some things the tide can't wash away, but it still tries. I never wrote back. There was nothing left between us to forgive or explain. Instead, I began to walk again. Every evening, before sunset, I went to the park. The same bench, the same tree. Sometimes there was an envelope tucked beneath the roots. Never addressed, never signed. I didn't open them. It didn't matter who left them. The act itself was enough, a quiet kind of understanding between strangers who once shared the same pain. One evening, I found a small object there instead of paper. A locket, tarnished silver, shaped like a tear. Inside was a photograph, the three of us years ago. Me holding the baby, him standing beside us, proud but distant. The nurse's handwriting on the back. So you won't forget what almost was. I closed it gently and kept it in my pocket. Autumn came again, soft and golden. The air turned crisp, and the leaves began to fall in slow spirals, painting the park in colors that made even grief look kind. I sat on the bench longer that day, watching children chase each other through puddles, their laughter carrying through the trees. For a moment, I imagined Elias among them, younger, lighter, untouched by the weight of our mistakes. The sun began to dip behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the path, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for a return, just for peace, the kind that comes quietly, without ceremony. As I stood to leave, a breeze moved through the branches above me. A single magnolia petal drifted down and landed on my shoulder. I smiled, whispering to no one and everyone, "It's enough now." And somehow it was. Winter arrived quietly that year. The trees stood bare, the streets thinner, the days shorter but softer somehow. People hurried past one another with their collars turned up, and I found myself slowing down, noticing details I used to miss. The sound of pigeons under bridges, the way frost outlined every window like a gentle signature of time. I had started volunteering at the community library. Nothing grand, just sorting returns, shelving old novels no one borrowed anymore. The smell of paper and dust comforted me. There was peace in the rhythm of it, in putting things back where they belonged, even when people never came looking for them again. One morning, a delivery came, boxes of donated books. I was unpacking them when a small, leather-bound journal slipped out and hit the floor. Its cover was cracked, its spine weak, but when I picked it up, my hands froze. Inside the first page was handwriting I recognized instantly. It was his, Elias. I stood there for a long time, the noise of the library fading around me. The ink had faded a little, but his words were still steady, careful. He had written about places, long drives through the countryside, the sound of rain on motel roofs, the faces of strangers who didn't ask questions. Every page felt like a conversation he had never needed to send. One line stopped me. I used to wonder if silence could be inherited. Now I know it can be broken instead. My eyes blurred before I could finish the paragraph. I closed the book and held it against my chest, feeling both the weight of it and the quiet mercy inside. He hadn't written in anger. He had written in peace, and somehow that was more than I'd ever asked for. That night, I lit a candle by the window, an old habit from when I used to wait for him. But this time, it wasn't for waiting. It was for gratitude. The flame flickered low, dancing against the glass. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft and slow, the kind of snow that covers every mark but never erases what lies beneath. I whispered into the quiet room, "Wherever you are, my son, I hope the wind is kind." And for the first time in my life, I believed it was. By spring, the snow had melted into thin streams that ran down the street. The city smelled of wetter earth and renewal. The park near my home was blooming again. Magnolias first, then violets, then the pale grass pushing through the mud. I walked there each morning, slower now, but lighter than before. The bench beneath the old oak was still there. So was the faint scar in the soil where the box had once been buried. Someone, maybe Elias, maybe the wind, had left a single white feather on the spot. I picked it up and smiled. I had stopped trying to guess which signs were meant for me. Sometimes the world just leaves small mercies behind, and you learn to say thank you without needing proof. The judge never wrote again. I heard through the nurse's nephew that he passed quietly in his sleep. A small house by the sea, books stacked beside his bed. They found no robe, no papers, just a note on his nightstand. The law can't measure regret. I sat for a long time after hearing that, thinking about how much of our lives had been built on silence and formality, and how fragile both had proven to be. At the library, I kept his photo on a back shelf between two casebooks. No one asked who he was, and I never volunteered the answer. Some truths are better left unspoken when they've already been lived. One evening, I took the small candle from my window, the one I had lit for Elias through every season, and carried it to the park. The air was soft, tinged with the scent of rain. I sat beneath the oak, set the candle on the ground, and waited for twilight. As the light dimmed, I opened Elias's journal once more. There was a final entry near the back, written in a steadier hand than the rest. I used to think stories ended when people died, but they don't. They end when someone finally learns to live with them. I traced the sentence with my thumb until the paper warmed beneath my touch. The candle flickered once, then steadied. Its flame mirrored in the gold reflection of the locket I still carried. I whispered his name again, not in grief this time, but in recognition. The sky darkened. Wind passed gently through the branches above me, scattering petals across the path. I watched them fall until the flame finally went out, leaving behind only the faint scent of wax and magnolia. And as I stood to leave, I realized I wasn't carrying sorrow anymore, only memory, soft and weightless, the kind that lets you walk forward without looking back. The night air felt kind on my skin, and for the first time in almost 30 years, I was no longer waiting for anyone. Years later, the courthouse was turned into a museum. The city said it was to preserve local history, but walking past it one afternoon, I knew they were really trying to preserve ghosts. The marble was polished again, the brass nameplate restored, but no one could scrub away what had happened there. I stood on the steps for a long time, watching people come and go with cameras and pamphlets, none of them knowing that lives had broken open behind those walls. The plaque outside read, "Justice through time." I almost laughed at the irony, because time had never delivered justice, only understanding, and only to those who lived long enough to bear it. Across the street, the same park waited. The oak tree had grown taller, its roots spreading like the veins of an old secret still alive underground. The bench was new now, smooth, clean, the wood untouched by rain or regret. Someone had carved 2 initials on the corner, yea. I ran my fingers across them, and a warmth rose in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. I sat there for a while, listening to the rustle of leaves above me, the low hum of the city beyond. Life moved forward, quietly and without apology. That was its way of forgiving us. From my bag, I took the last item I had kept, Elias's journal, now bound in a new cover, its pages worn from the touch of my hands. I opened to the final page. The ink had faded, but the words were still there, steady as the day he wrote them. Every story has a courtroom, And every heart carries its own verdict. But some sentences aren't meant to punish. They're meant to set you free. I closed the book and rested it on the bench. A young woman walking by stopped and asked, "Did you forget that?" I smiled and said, "No, I'm just returning it." She nodded politely and walked on. But I stayed there, watching as the evening light caught the edges of the pages, turning them gold before the wind lifted the cover slightly, as if the story itself was breathing one last time. When I finally stood, I felt lighter than I ever had, not because I was done grieving, but because I no longer needed to. The courthouse behind me, the tree before me, the world in between, all of it exactly where it belonged. I whispered to the air, to Elias, to him, to every silence that had ever kept me company. It's over now, and we're all right. Then I walked away slowly, the sound of the wind following me like a promise kept at last. Spring turned to summer, and I stayed in the city longer than I planned. The museum drew crowds, school children with notebooks, couples taking photos on the steps. Sometimes I'd pass by and see my reflection in the glass doors. Older now, but still standing, still watching. No one knew who I was, and that anonymity felt like peace. The library where I worked became my second home. Afternoons were slow, sunlight stretching across the floor in long ribbons. I shelved books, answered small questions, and sometimes caught myself tracing the spines of novels that once belonged to him. On the top shelf of the reference section, Elias's journal rested quietly between two larger volumes. I had donated it to the library a month earlier. Not under my name, just a label on the inside cover, from an anonymous contributor. Every now and then, I'd find it slightly out of place, its pages marked by a folded piece of paper or a press flower. Someone was reading it, and somehow that was enough. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed simply to the librarian. Inside was a single page, handwritten in a firm, familiar hand. No name, no signature, just one sentence. "You were right, the wind was kind." I smiled so deeply it ached. I didn't need to know where he was. That line was more than an address, it was an answer. I folded the note and slipped it inside my pocket, close to where I still kept the old silver locket. The years began to soften around me. I stopped counting them. The world moved on. New faces, new laughter. And somewhere far away, a man I once called my son learning to live unburdened. The ache in my chest no longer hurt when I breathed deeply. It had turned into something quieter. A reminder, not a wound. Sometimes, in the late evenings, when the air was warm and the sky pink at the edges, I'd walk through the park again. Children still played near the oak tree, and a few petals still fell onto the path just as they used to. I'd sit on the bench, the new one, the clean one, and feel the breeze move through my hair. I'd close my eyes and listen. It always sounded the same. Soft, steady, like someone breathing beside me. Maybe memory itself has a sound. And maybe that's how love survives. Not in words, or in people, but in the gentle noise of what refuses to leave. When the lamps flickered on and the park grew quiet, I'd whisper into the dusk, not expecting an answer, but knowing one was already there. "Thank you," I'd say, "for staying this long." And the wind, faithful as ever, would rise just enough to move the petals around my feet, as if bowing in return.